First of all, let me start by welcoming the deal reached on providing long-term financial support for Ukraine. This is good news. Ukraine is our priority, and that is why we needed this agreement today by all 27 member states and from within the EU budget. This will give the credibility, the legitimacy and the predictability that is expected from us, because Ukraine's security is Europe's security. And for this, we must deliver on the commitment we made 2 years ago, that we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. We made that commitment not just from a moral standpoint, but from a strategic one too. Because in doing so, we knew that at a time would come where our world would be put to the test, and that moment is now. And for the European Parliament, we were very clear from the very beginning that there was no other option but to do precisely this. I also take note on the agreement of the revised multi-annual financial framework. We will still need to scrutinise the details of this deal. The Parliament has been very clear in its priorities and its position that we need to live up to our promises, to boost our competitiveness and to be credible for our citizens. As we understand, the agreement that was reached includes a modest increase in funding for migration management and for natural disasters, but in reality, it also pulls money out of programmes that our citizens depend on, and which member states agreed on a few years ago. With the European elections in sight, in fact, and this was one of the points that I made with the heads of state and government, we should boost and not reduce our funding for health, EU for Health, for example, and research such as Horizon. We also discussed the dire situation in the Middle East, and how we can move the peace process forward. The European Parliament was the first EU institution to call for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. It is a necessary step towards lasting peace and stability, as are the return of all hostages and the need for Gaza to be led by legitimate Palestinian representatives. We also need to make sure that humanitarian aid can continue to flow in as quickly and efficiently as possible. It is possible to break the cycle of history. A two-state solution can offer security to Israel and a perspective for the Palestinian people. Finally, allow me a few words on elections. 2024 will be a massive year for democracy, for Europe, and for the world, and contrary to Russia, where the results are already known, our elections will allow our citizens to decide for themselves the direction of Europe for the coming 5 years. So my appeal is for us not to take our democracy, the rights that we fought so hard for granted, but to defend that democracy by taking part, because every vote matters. I'll leave it here, and please, I'm happy to take your questions.
Christian first, Laura second. Christian, please.
Salut.
Qui est devenu un peu traditionnel de tous nos
Oui,
rendez-vous.
exact.
Il y a deux choses qui m'intéressent dans votre intervention. La première, vous dites qu'effectivement le Parlement va devoir examiner bien les détails de l'accord qui a été conclu. Or, si j'ai bien conclu l'accord qui a été passé avec Viktor Orban, c'est le deuxième point qui est intéressant, qui concerne la conditionnalité. On a rappelé à Mme von der Leyen les règles de la conditionnalité. En fait, on a un peu l'impression qu'il est demandé à la Commission européenne de les regarder moins sévèrement. Alors, je voudrais savoir si le Parlement européen va accepter cet assouplissement de l'analyse des règles de la conditionnalité pour débourser plus d'argent pour la Hongrie qui n'a pas fait le nécessaire pour remplir ces règles-là. Et est-ce que vous ne risquez pas aussi d'être amené à avoir des sérieux débats au niveau du Parlement, voire même aller jusqu'à une motion de censure si jamais ça va trop loin? Ma deuxième question, c'est pour les élections européennes. Vous avez rappelé, bon, elle est toute bête ma question, c'est est-ce que vous envisagez de faire un deuxième mandat si jamais on vous donne la confiance, et visiblement beaucoup de gens vous donnent la confiance au Parlement, pour faire un bis à la tête du Parlement européen? Merci.
Alors, sur la première question, on peut rappeler la position du Parlement. C'était le Parlement qui a initié la procédure de l'article 7 il y a 4 ans. C'était le Parlement qui maintenant met des questions sur les 10 milliards qui étaient payés avant le dernier Conseil européen. Et ça, pour nous, n'est pas fini. Il y a un processus devant notre commission des affaires juridiques et on va voir comme institution qui garde avec beaucoup de sensibilité et beaucoup de priorité pour nous et pour nos citoyens l'état de droit et aussi la conditionnalité, comme vous avez rappelé, parce que c'était la priorité du Parlement d'avoir la conditionnalité avec les disbursements des fonds pour tous les États membres. Pour nous, la situation de traiter tous les États membres dans la même manière, alors c'est pas une seulement ou l'autre, ça sera la priorité, pas maintenant seulement, mais aussi dans les 5 ans qui viennent. Et nous serons très engageants avec la Commission, parce que aussi la prochaine Commission, le prochain collège doit avoir des commissaires qui sont engagés sur ce processus. Pour nous, c'est très important parce que c'est depuis des années qu'on demande que l'état de droit est un principe fondamental, pas seulement sur l'aspect budgétaire, mais aussi sur l'aspect des valeurs. Et c'est une chose que les citoyens nous demandent quand on va vers les élections. Sur la deuxième question, moi, je n'aime pas parler sur moi. Et alors, je dois concentrer sur ce procès démocratique. Nous sommes très fiers sur le processus démocratique dans tous les États membres. Je suis en train de visiter tous les États membres et parler pas seulement avec les autorités, mais aussi avec les jeunes. On a un grand défi, c'est d'encourager les jeunes à voter. Aussi, si nous voyons la situation aujourd'hui avec les agriculteurs, c'est aussi une responsabilité que nous avons de parler avec tous les secteurs, tous nos peuples qui nous demandent de résoudre ou adresser leurs craintes. Et alors, c'est ça que moi je vais concentrer dans le moins de 5 mois qui viennent. Et j'ai fait déjà 5 pays. J'ai encore beaucoup à faire, aussi dans mon pays, et c'est ça que je vais me concentrer jusqu'à juin.
Laura, you asked for a question. No.
I won't answer.
2 Lauras, maybe.
We can take both Lauras.
Please, yes, you can start.
Okay. A question about Hungary. Given the discontent manifested by Donald Tusk during this morning's doorstep statements, has there been any compromise reached during the summit for this agreement for Ukraine? And about the election, if you gave some guidelines, or if you can pass the term, for how to handle these difficult elections, especially given the another rise of populism in Europe. Thank you.
Okay, we want Laura to do a bis with Laura now. Yeah.
Our parents are not very original. Hi, so I have 2 questions. First of all, is on the MFF deal, if you have any specific date by which Parliament could give consent, if it would be in the plenaries this month or later. And my second question is not UCO related, but this week we learned that an MEP has been acting as an FSB agent for some years, and I was wondering how the investigation on this is coming along, what measures is the Parliament going to take, and if you're services have learned of any other similar instances recently?
Yeah, thank you very much. So there's an overlap between both of your questions, and I will take that together. First of all, on the first question of Laura, I think we should focus on the fact that today is a good day for Europe. We have to do that. We have been for many weeks keeping our Ukrainian friends on tenterhooks as to whether we would reach an agreement, and the fact that it was reached so early on is also thanks to the hard work done by a lot of our leaders in order to bring it to a resolution which includes all 27. It would have been much less ideal if we would have had an agreement at 26, and that was important for us. It was also important for the Parliament that this agreement of an additional 50 billion Ukraine facility was taken from within the Ukraine budget, because that influences the ongoing trialogue on the Ukraine facility, which is important and affects the speed with which we have co-decision on this agreement. In terms of what we would, of course, have hoped that it was more ideal if there were no conditions tied to such an agreement. We are in a situation where we would continue to urge that the unity that we found over the past years on Ukraine, on the 12 packages on sanctions with regards to Russia, on also the decisions by majority that we've taken on the Migration Pact, huge legislative advance since the last time I was in this room at the last European Council. So I would rather focus on that today and hope that we can continue to count for this, because that's what our citizens want. Our citizens want solutions. They do not want to see a Europe that is divided. They do not want to see, although I can share the frustrations expressed in the doorsteps today, absolutely, but I think perhaps if that aided for us to find a solution, let's focus on the good news and the compromise reached. On the guidelines for elections, this will tie in to Laura's second part of the question. Yes, I was asked by a number of prime ministers on disinformation and misinformation. The impact of social media platforms and how this could be framed within the application one of the Digital Services Act, which entered into force last autumn, the negotiations that we're currently having with the social media partners that will be helping us as an institution to run an EU-wide campaign in order for our messaging to filter through the onslaught of propaganda that is filling social media feeds, including, I can tell you, those of my own children when I see what their feeds are filled with, and my children have reached voting age now. We also discussed the situation, and I linked it because the allegations that have surfaced this week with a particular member of the European Parliament from Latvia with regards to potential alleged foreign interference by a third country is linked. The risk this brings to our institution, not only from a reputational perspective, but from a security perspective, and also the risks it could hold for the election that we are gearing up for. It is one that we are taking extremely seriously. I have referred the case to the Advisory Committee on the Code of Conduct, which means that investigations within the European Parliament have been opened. You might recall that we have revised the rules and beefed up this advisory committee on the Code of Conduct following allegations and revelations last year, which I'm very proud that as a parliament we've gone so far on. And that means that now violations of Code of Conduct will also lead in, if cases are proven, for the announcement of sanctions in Parliament's plenary. Furthermore, in light of safety and security concerns, I took the decision that the event hosted by the member of the European Parliament in question, scheduled for yesterday, 31st of January, would not take place in the premises of the European Parliament. That was deemed by myself and all the services to be the necessary action to take. It has also put us on the alert. I am in contact with the Prime Minister of Latvia and countries and their leaders that are worried that this could be replicated in other situations, whether in the current legislature or the future one, and that is one that we are taking extremely seriously. Perhaps one last point, and this is also with regards to what we saw happening last week in the United States. In the primaries for the US elections. This is something that we should be prepared for too. In the European Union. And whereas it is not yet time, or it might not happen yet in June for the implementation of the Artificial Intelligence Act, where we specifically spoke about and are legislating on the potential interference of voters' behaviour and manipulation of such behaviour as a real threat to our democratic processes that could manifest themselves, perhaps not already in June, but in future elections, very much something that was at the core of the debate that I had with the Prime Ministers today. On the date, we will have a vote on the consent on February 2. In other words, not next week in plenary, but the next one.
D'autres questions? Lorenzo?
Lorenzo Consuliasca, News Italy. I have two questions concerning the agriculture concerns, the farmers' consent and the farmers' protestation that in this moment are very visible in Brussels and around the European Parliament. If I understand well, the Parliament is having a debate next week in Strasbourg on this. My question is, are you not worried that this would, let's say, feed a sort of a populistic view of Europe? I mean, yesterday, the minister from the Italian League, Salvini, here in Brussels, in the Parliament, said that the European Commission led by von der Leyen was a disaster. And now a disaster, the European Commission that actually was and this Europe that actually had the recovery plan, the RRF, and that accomplished the three-quarters of the Green Deal at least. I mean, are you afraid that this would feed populism in the elections, this kind of protest, and what kind of answer can be given to the agriculture world, to the farmers? In these accusations against Europe, I mean, why are they have a lot of money from Europe? Why are they going against Europe? What is that has to be corrected to avoid this narrative that is Europe the enemy, or that is the environment the enemy of farmers? Thank you.
So the reason why we will have a debate next week, and this is not only linked to the protests that are taking place today, but to an understanding of the fact that if we look back at 2023 alone, there were such protests and a call for consultation in 15 member states. We have a committee inside the Parliament on agricultural affairs. This was also part of the debate that I had with the Prime Ministers this morning, which has specifically been asking for years for such a discussion. And in this regard, we welcome the strategic dialogue that has commenced, has been launched with the farmers, although, to be frank, it's a little bit late. I also turn it around. Let's not focus on blaming those who protest, but rather say that we listen to you. We very much believe as a parliament that no one's voice should be ignored. At the same time, we will support the green transition, because none of our policies, and also what you mentioned, and the flagship legislation that was passed in the European Parliament as co-legislators will not succeed without the commitment of our fellow citizens, or if the measures requested are not realistic. So if we look at the impact of our agricultural sector, they provide solutions to combat climate change in terms of carbon capture and even the bioeconomy. This is essential to decarbonise our industry, so we must listen and we must dialogue with them. And also there is administrative simplification work to be carried out. So this is what we do every day as a parliament. And we will face, as candidates, including myself, debates on the local level of what we've done so far, where we could have done better, and we need to be honest with ourselves where we could have done better. Of course, be very proud of our successes, but also understand where we could improve in explaining the advantages of the ongoing double transition. On the voting trend, on what could this lead to? You know, every subject that we deal with, whether it is migration, whether it is climate, even the digital transition, artificial intelligence, is today, let's say, accompanied by a prequel to will this lead to a rise in the populist or nationalistic right? And my answer to this is, first of all, if we listen to all our citizens, we should not ignore anybody. If we counter that narrative, we can really bring together a coalition that builds and not destroys. And this is something that I think we should work on over the next few months. In my opinion, perhaps we did not do that enough in the past, which has led to voters finding comfort on the fringes. And we need to be able, we actually have a responsibility to bring those voters to find once again comfort in the centre of the political spectrum. As regards a specific issue, and I would like to address it here and to continue on this trajectory of my, let's say, of the metaphor of building, not destroying, I would say that irrespective of what I've just said, what we have seen today on the Place de Luxembourg, with the destruction of a historic monument, statues of workers, is very difficult for us to counter and to be able to bring to the discussion, even with the most understandable of grievances. So my appeal would be to use one's voice to vote in June and not destroy.
Yes, please. David.
Thank you. David Carretta, Radio Radicale Italian Radio. Two questions, if I may. The first one is a political judgment by you on the compromise with Orban, in fact. The conclusions are quite clear. The European Council is implicitly asking the Commission to unblock some funds. We don't know how much, but at the end some billions to Hungary. And this is the result of a blackmail for basically 2 months by Orban, who received 10 billion in December. So I would like to know, what do you think about these blackmailing tactics in the European Union? And the second question is a more general one on the role of the Parliament. You correctly said that there is not just an increase in budget, there is also some cuts on Horizon, on Heading 6, which is neighbourhood policies, health, and so on. And the position of the European Council is clear: take it or leave it. The Parliament should give its consent, and that's all. We have seen that also with the economic governance review, and at the end of the day on the migration pact, because the final result was basically the compromise at the Council. What's the role of the Parliament in all of this? After 5 years and 2 years and half of your presidency, with you asking to your colleagues to be more, let's say, active on legislation and political level and so on, what is your conclusion at the end of this mandate? Thank you.
And the conclusion is one of, let's say, continuing to insist on upholding of our institutional role, as we did during the pandemic and the ensuing energy crisis, that we insisted that we can, as a parliament, and we did, when asked to act with urgency, more than we've ever done before, with speed, we stepped up to the plate. And I would say with big improvement on how things used to be done before. And in fact, our argument has been, don't use the length of procedures as an excuse to ignore the Parliament or bypass the Parliament. And I think that we have seen an improvement of that. If you think that we agreed on gas storage and the ammunitions deal in 8 weeks, and today we look at the fact that we're still waiting for the implementation of that agreement. So we could be asking the same question back in terms of where the institutional cooperation and loyalty between the institutions and also predictability of our decisions has happened. So that would be my reflection of looking back, with a reiteration of the fact that we will, as I said, look at the details of the deal reached today, that there will be a serious discussion. Trialogues are ongoing also before consent is given. And that is our institutional role, which we take very seriously. In fact, one of our appeals months ago was about the fact that we would not have liked today's deal to be taken outside the budget. And in fact, it was not taken outside the budget because that would have been excluding the Parliament. In terms of the first part of your question, I would say, as I said earlier, we will always protect the rule of law. The case has been brought. Questions will be asked, have been asked. Is it an ideal scenario? No. But have we found unity and unanimity today? Yes. So I think we should welcome that, and we should really send the strongest of message, which is the opposite of what Putin would have wanted.
And maybe one last question. Yes, please, the lady.
Thank you. Lisa O'Carroll from The Guardian. Just two questions, one on Orban, or two on Orban. Can you give us an idea of what he said when he came into the room, after the agreement had been informally taken with the leaders? And secondly, just to pick up on David's question, do you understand that this addition on conditionality, this extra paragraph, is about something to give to Orban, or is it just something to remind Orban that there are effective sanctions against him on future blackmail, etc.? And then the second question is about farming. Leo Varadkar this morning, the Irish Taoiseach, said that he would disagree with Mercosur and it should not be ratified, agreeing with Macron. Do you have a view on that? Thanks.
So with regards to the additional paragraph, I mean, we read it literally and politically, so to speak. And as we know, our experience tells us about European Council conclusions is that they are an extremely delicate balance of making sure that you can have the 27 leaders around the table coming to what is effectively a deal. As I said, would it have been more ideal if we reached this decision in December? Of course. Does Ukraine need this money yesterday? Of course. Have we today agreed to disburse the money to Ukraine from our budget? Yes. And let's also remind the original position of Viktor Orban in December was that he wanted unanimity every year to disburse money. So we could also say that the paragraph that wasn't included today was actually a move towards that the other member states needing that reassurance that we will not be facing this every European Council, which could be the case for every other leader to do the same. But I also want to, because we focus a lot on veto and the possibility of member states stalling, not to take away from the success that we've seen in the last mandate and the last few months, where majority was pushed through on essential parts, core areas of European policy, which never existed before, such as on migration, whereas until a few weeks ago, there was no political will to do so. So I'm very much happy to say that with the roadmap that European Parliament and the Council signed in 2022, we really will be ready, pending a vote in Parliament in March or in April, on the Migration Pact, which is delivering for our citizens. And I say this because in such a campaign where the idea would be to try to focus on where divisions exist, we also should welcome where there are none or where there have been majorities reached. And I think that that is something that we can also celebrate today. On trade, I think that the next 5 years, and I put this in the context very much of, in the case of such global elections, as we move towards potential situations where Europe will have to realize increasingly that there are some things we're going to need to do ourselves, by ourselves. And there, the relationships that we have with partner countries, from an economic perspective, investment perspective, and not only relating to Latin America, because there I would see a specific role on our debate that should be expanded on critical raw materials, but India, for example. On Monday there was an Italy-Africa summit in Rome, which I attended, and that was also the appeal, do not talk at us, but talk with us, talk to us. So I think we should, and I heard what the Taoiseach said, and it's something that we will continue to discuss with him, that we need to also bring this into how we are going to retain our competitiveness, how we're going to discuss with our sectors that feel that they will be directly hit by any deals with third countries or partnerships across. But at the end of the day, trade remains one of our most important tools that we need to continue to work on. And to go even further, if you think about the length of time that it has taken on CETA, an agreement with Australia, on New Zealand, I think we should also look at our processes with gratitude, actually, to Executive Vice President Valdis Dombrovskis and his team, and also with a constructive attitude from the Parliament that we can find agreement rather than not, because the next 5 years will be crucial in this regard.